delighted to be joined today by Marshall Glickman, CEO of G2 Strategic, who is a very well-known character to many of us, both from obviously all his work with LaLiga and the EuroLeague Basketball. But perhaps, Marshall, you could just start off by giving us, a bit of a background about yourself, your experience and career highlights to date.
Hi, Katie. Thank you. Let's see. My background, I'm born in Portland, Oregon. Born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I went to Lewis and Clark College, which is in Portland, Oregon, although I had a short stint at Bard College in New York. I went to work in the radio syndication business in Los Angeles after graduating from college. I came back to Portland. I knocked on doors selling cable TV subscriptions. That's kind of how I launched my career, which was really taught me a lot. That was a very valuable experience. I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I went to work for the Trailblazers. We started something called Blazer Cable, which was in its day very innovative because the club had sold out at the gate for many, many, many years, meaning you couldn't get a ticket. There was a huge waiting list. So we had originally started showing games in a theater where people paid $10 to sit in a large theater with 3,000 seats and watch the game on a giant screen. And believe me, in those days, the image wasn't that great. But people liked being together. It was a social experience. Literally, people were yelling at the refs, even though the referees could not hear them. People were standing up for the national anthem and saying the national anthem. I mean, it was virtual. It was very interesting. Anyway, we then extended that idea into the home when addressable cable converters appeared for the first time in the early 80s when we could do pay-per-view. And we sold that as a package, like a mini season ticket, or a la carte as pay-per-view. So with that, I got noticed a little bit and started becoming friends with David Stern before he was commissioner. And he became kind of, like in the old days, we had pen pals. He became like a phone pal. And I learned very quickly that the way to reach David Stern was to call after his assistant had left for the day, because then I knew he would pick up. And so he took my calls, and I'm just some kid, and he took my calls, and we started chatting about things that were interesting to him, like satellites. What are satellites going to do for the NBA as far as how we can distribute games? And so he took an interest in me, and that led to in '86 I got a call and said, we'd like to talk to you. Ed Desser, who is a brilliant guy, still is a brilliant guy, was kind of the impresario of broadcasting in those days. But they wanted Ed to focus all of his efforts on expanding the NBA as a viable property internationally. So Ed was going to focus on global sales. This is the first time the NBA realized that some broadcaster in Spain or maybe the UK would pay the NBA to have NBA games on in Europe and then South America and then Asia, right? So they needed somebody basically to replace Ed. And so I stepped in. It was really strange. One day I'm in Portland, and the next day I'm in New York City. They flew me out for interviews. I interviewed with Ed and with David and with Russ Granick, who was then the deputy commissioner of the league, a wonderful man. And I came home, and a couple days later I got the call, and they offered me the gig, and I didn't even ask about the money. I said, I'm out, I'm going. So, the next day you're living in New York City, right? I mean, that's quite an eye-opener for a kid from Portland. So I was there for 2 years, and I returned to Portland after 2 years. I look back at that with a little regret, to be honest with you. I was anxious to expand my career. The Blazers wanted me back. I was working for a wonderful man, one of the great minds in the history of our business, named John Spolstra. You guys might know that name. John is a well-known author. One of the great books of all time was Selling Ice to the Eskimos, which he is the author of. And John's son, by the way, you might recognize the name, is the coach of the Miami Heat. And I knew Eric Spolstra when he was a little kid, 5 years old, right? So John, I returned to the Trailblazers, and shortly after coming back in '88, Paul Allen bought the club. And, we all assumed, and so I'm kind of a, semi-upper middle manager kind of person at that point, working on lots of different things. And we all assumed new owners coming in were probably going to lose our jobs. That's how it goes a lot of times. But it turned out good for me. John left at some point. I was promoted 2 or 3 times. Ultimately, they assigned me the lead role in the development of a new arena in Portland, which today is called the Moda Center. And that changed my life, or certainly it changed my professional career, because, we had to borrow money. We had to get ratings from rating agencies. We had to deal with big fancy lawyers from LA and New York. We had to negotiate a public-private partnership with the city of Portland, and in spite of the Blazers' popularity, it was a very difficult deal to put together. We had to deal with all kinds of land use issues. I had to learn the construction business, the architecture business, and it was an amazing experience. So from '89 to when that building opened in '95, I was very wrapped up in that, in addition to trying to provide leadership for the Blazers. Now, the Blazers were a very successful team. Our gate receipts were, I believe at one point, we were number 4 in the league in gate receipts, but we were number 2 in terms of the smallest capacity. So the yield per seat that we were getting was incredible. And then, so that transitions to what ALSD is all about, because the way in which Paul Allen said, look, I will put a certain amount of money on the table. And it turned out that that certain amount of money was $46 million. Okay, we had, however, a $262 million project on our hands. Paul Allen said, you have to figure out how to bring in the rest of the capital, and do not ask me to guarantee any of it. I'm not going to personally guarantee any loans. Don't ask for the Trailblazers to be on the table as collateral for any loans. Not doing that. So, at that time I was wet behind my ears. I did not know the finance business, but I learned it very quickly, surrounding myself with some really, really excellent and smart people. So what we were able to do is we were able to borrow $155 million. Now you got to remember, we're talking late 80s, early 90s numbers here. So this is close to like $1 billion today. We had to borrow $155 million without recourse to Paul Allen or the Trailblazers. How would you do that? What's the collateral? What is the security for the loan? That's when we were one of the early pioneers in creating the term contractually obligated income, COI, which is very well known today in our industry, right? And COI meant that if we could convince enough companies to sign long-term, and long-term was defined as 3 or more years, long-term legally binding agreements for suites, club seats, courtside seats, sponsorships, primarily those 4, few other things in that deal, but mostly those 4. If we could get enough of those contracts where the cumulative value of those contracts was enough to have a ratio of contractually obligated income to debt service of 1.75 to 1, they would loan us the money. So that meant that we had to go and sell suites, club seats, and sponsorships before we could start. So basically, we're working in those days, we didn't have very good computers then. We're working with renderings, and with our mouths, we're making presentations to people. The first suites were sold, by the way, to Nike, who bought two, one for Nike and one for Phil, right? But we built a model suite, so we learned how to do that, just like we do when we're, with real estate. We brought people into our model suite. We only accepted appointments with decision makers. We would not let anybody in there that was not a decision maker. And we were really successful at that time. And they would not put the money in the construction fund, meaning we could not start construction until we hit a ratio of 1.5 to 1. And then we had to hit 1.75 to 1 by a certain date. We did incredibly well, and we got it all done. And that deal also got an investment grade rating, both from Fitch, who had done it before, but also the first ever investment grade rating from Standard & Poor's. And those two ratings also strengthened the creditworthiness of the bond issue that we did. And then the buyers of the investors were a consortium of institutions led at the time by Prudential Power Funding. That's sort of an arm of Prudential, which traditionally had put their money behind things like hydro projects, energy, because also contractually obligated. The same economic theories, the same financing structure was put to work, believe it or not, between energy and sports. And we got a lot of recognition for that. I was actually in Institutional Investor magazine. I never thought I would be in Institutional Investor magazine, but I was. We were cited as the deal of the year. And so that's something that even to this day, I'm really proud of. So we opened the building, we got it done. In 95, I left, needed a break. And then I did a little consulting work for a while, and then I started a new company on my own called Portland Family Entertainment. We followed the same principles of financing, but first I needed equity because I had no Paul Allen now. The first time I had Paul Allen and his 46 million. This time I had nothing. So I went out and I raised 8 million of private equity with a group of 13 investors. So I ran around and basically pitched. And then we were able to use that and leverage another 25 million of non-recourse institutional debt, which was bought by TIAA CREF, which is teachers annuity funding. And then we used those proceeds and we leveraged a PPP with the city of Portland, who put up another 40 million. And we took all those funds and we renovated a really, really old outdoor stadium. It was built in the 20s. And it was kind of crumbling, and we renovated it. We made it retro cool, retro hip. And then we went and we bought a AAA baseball team in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We moved it to Portland. We renamed it the Portland Beavers, which was the traditional name of the AAA team in Portland years ago. We then were close to a deal with MLS, but MLS at the time, first of all, they had an inflated value of what they thought they were worth. Now, of course, in hindsight, we should have moved forward, right? But back then, the number seemed a little out of line. But more importantly, the MLS at the time was saying you have to play on grass. And I said, well, I appreciate the purity of that statement, as all English people would agree with MLS, and all Spanish people and all German people, all French, all Italian. But I said, I can't play on grass because I've got a baseball team and a soccer team, and I've got a college football team also that's going to play here in the fall, and some high school football, and I want to do live music, and I can't do that on natural grass. I need to use fake grass. And MLS at the time said no to that. Now, of course, today there's several MLS teams that play on fake grass. So, reality set in. So instead, we went and got an expansion team in the United Soccer Leagues, which was the number, basically second division. And we started the team from nothing, but we gave the team the name the Portland Timbers because that was the traditional name that went back to the 70s when we had a team in the North American Soccer League. And that team was huge. Portland did huge numbers back in NASL days. Pele played in Portland for the New York Cosmos. So Portland already had established a reputation as being a great soccer market. So we had a very interesting approach because we did a multi-purpose outdoor stadium. And when you have baseball, that means, and soccer, it means that you can't have stands on the one side of the pitch, because that's outfield of baseball. So it was kind of a strange configuration, but it worked. And then ultimately we sold all those assets and I got out of it. And then Merritt Paulson, who's the son of the former Treasury Secretary of the United States, bought those assets ultimately. And after that, he wanted to be MLS. So he made a deal to upgrade from second division to first division MLS, but he needed to build out the stadium, and therefore he had to evict the baseball team from that stadium. I think he tried very hard to make a deal or find a new location to build a baseball stadium somewhere else in Portland, but it didn't work out. And so he eventually sold the baseball team and it moved to Texas. So Portland, and then the rest of it, the Timbers are one of the great success stories in football globally. It's unbelievable. The experience is great. A good friend of mine, Mike Gollbach, runs a show there and the business there. And it's really cool. And then after all that, I got this phone call one day from a guy named Jordi Bertomeu, who's the CEO of EuroLeague Basketball. Jordi at the time in 2002, his English was so-so, so he was talking through his assistant, Rosaire Quiralto. I don't know how the hell he ever heard of me. Now I know it was David Stern who put him together with me. We had a couple, 3 chats over the phone. He said, they had just finished, or they were in the middle of their second season. So EuroLeague started in 2000. It was a breakaway from FIBA. It used to all be run by the international governing body, and this was the Spanish league clubs and the Italian league clubs and the Greek league clubs segregating themselves from the governing body. I said, what's the mission? He said, I need help transitioning from a competition to a business. They said, send me a proposal. I sent them a proposal. They said, yes. There was no discussion. There was no pushback, nothing. Part of my deal, I called somebody and I said, what do you ask for when you're an expat? What do I need? Put aside the money. What do I need as far as living? And so they said, well, make sure you ask for, a television and a DVD player and a washing machine, right? And a dryer. Well, I didn't know that people in Spain don't use dryers. I mean, very few people have dryers. Most people in Spain, even wealthy people, hang their clothes, which is how you keep your clothes nicer. But that's the culture. I didn't understand it. So anyway, they hired me without ever meeting me. And
wow.
we didn't have video conferencing. So it was just over the phone. And since we didn't know each other, I said, well, let's do kind of we agreed to do a short term, like a 4-month, I think it was a 4-month contract. Because I didn't even know what I was walking into. All I knew is I was a free agent and this sounded fun. And my kid was 2 years old and my wife was a free agent. And I said, hey, let's go to Spain. How cool is this? We're going to Barcelona. So we literally packed our bags and we found ourselves in Barcelona, and Rosaire picked us up at the airport. She put our luggage in one taxi and she put our bodies in the other taxi. And we go to this apartment that they found for me. And we go up and get on this elevator that barely had room for 2 people, right? Little elevators. And we go up and the elevator opens and we're in my apartment. And it was, it was really great space. And when we walked in the foyer, there were all these boxes, and I go, what's all this? And well, that's the washing machine, and there's the dryer, and they had to go buy all this stuff. It was amazing. And I was one of the few people in Barcelona, I guess, that had a dryer. You know, it's like really.
And how long did you end up staying in Barcelona then? It was obviously longer than 4 months.
Yeah, we ended up staying for 2 years. You have to adapt to culture and lifestyle. It's quite different. The standard of living is different. I'm not saying worse, I'm just saying different. I mean, we had an amazing time in Barcelona, and I could spend hours telling you stories and friendships that we made with people that had nothing to do with business. I mean, it was just a fabulous experience. After 2 years, however, we decided that, we wanted to continue. I think they were pleased with my counsel, and I really fell in love with Spain, the people, friendships, everything. I became a believer. Basketball is a small sport in Europe, right? Relatively, but especially with football being so dominant. But I really became a believer in the future of basketball, going all the way back. Now, some of that was because Jordi was so awesome. I thought, you walk in and you think you're a smart person, you've got all this experience and you know something, right? And I realized very quickly I didn't know anything. I mean, this idea that you can take whatever works in the NBA and just sort of, cut and paste is BS. You can't. You have to understand culture. You have to understand history. You have to understand politics. You have to understand economic. You have to understand how the structures work. It's very different. You've got governing bodies, layers and layers and layers. The idea when they explained to me that Barcelona was owned by its 100,000+ members, and that the members got to vote on who the president was. I mean, I'm thinking, this is amazing, man. We should try this in the States. There's a lot of presidents that would have been fired over the years, right? The members say, you're out, man. I want a new one. And, sort of how the media kind of plays into it, and how the so-called supporters / ultras in your country / hooligans, all of that history and how that history affects things as simple as access control, right? And how you manage people. And then when I saw, like fences to separate the visiting fans, I mean, I'm looking at that going, what? Right? So Jordi was amazing and gave me, it was like going to school. I mean, it really was. And he brought me into his office and spent hours teaching me. And I'll just never forget him for that. I mean, he did not need to do that. He gave me an education. I, of course, was there to push the envelope and try to get them to behave more like a business instead of just a sports thing. And I've been plugging away with them for now 19 years. It's amazing. And I'm super proud of them, because I don't think most people understand how complex and challenging it is to do what they're doing. And I think their future is incredibly bright. They've moved. I could spend hours. They've moved in a really great way. So from that, I moved to Boston. I started this company, G2 Strategic, in Boston. The only reason Boston was it was a shorter flight to Europe. I also like Boston, and I had a cousin there. That was it. We lived in Boston for 2 years, and then at that point, our son was heading into grade school, and he was actually in first grade in Boston. But we decided, my parents and my wife Lisa's family back in Portland, we said, well, are we going to stay here through high school, or are we going to go back? And we decided to go back, and I just sort of said, well, okay, I got to be on a plane in 3 hours longer. That's all it really meant. So we moved back here, but we didn't move to Portland. Instead, we moved to a place called Bend, Oregon, which is 3 hours from Portland, and it's God's country. It's one of the most really awesome places in the world. It's for skiing and for Nordic skiing and alpine skiing and for hiking and biking and everything. It's just an amazing place. It's in the middle of the mountains, beautiful place. Growing city, but a relatively small city, about 100,000 people. And so we were there for 8 years. My son grew up there, and I don't know what happened, but my son became really a very gifted piano player. He was also an athlete. So usually jocks and musicians aren't the same people. In this case, he was both, which was unique. But he became really, really good piano player, most as a jazz pianist, to the point where by the time he was in 8th grade, if he was going to grow as a pianist, we had to leave Bend because he needed to be in a bigger city where there were higher level people that he could learn from. So we moved to Portland, and we've been in Portland ever since.
Oh, wow.
So
and how's his jazz career?
My son is a sophomore. He'll be 20 years old in August. He's a business music double major at the University of Oregon because he knows that making a living as a musician is not easy. But he's a very, very fine pianist, and he's part of what's called Jazz Arts Oregon, which is the elite. It's like making the team. It's it's making the varsity. So he as a sophomore, to be selected for Jazz Arts is a real accomplishment. Usually it's seniors or graduate students. So he's very accomplished. He's very good. I'm a very lucky father.
So I'm not surprised, and I'm sure the business acumen, you have more than a little something to do that side of things as well. So obviously,
he is to figure out how to monetize his abilities as a musician in the business of music. So he's got in mind a career in the music business, which is great.
And so obviously you're saying, so you moved back to Portland and you set up G2 Strategic. You obviously had EuroLeague Basketball was one of your founding clients. And then sort of, obviously then I imagine relatively quickly, obviously I can see from your portfolio, it's got the whole gamut from ATP to the French Tennis Federation, LaLiga, France's Ligue 1, the list goes on. So obviously, I take it you've been able to take everything that you've learned from the US market, and then from obviously the 2 years living in Spain and Barcelona, working for the EuroLeague, and sort of knowing now the different cultures, and then being able to, I suppose, translate what works in the US to how it could then be relatable for obviously the very different fans in the European market.
That's right. Actually, outside of EuroLeague, my first clients in Europe, as I started to try to build a portfolio business, was tennis. And it really was interesting. I sort of forced my way in, and I finally convinced the ATP to allow me to make a presentation at their European annual meetings in Monte Carlo. And I make this presentation, and I'm really talking to people. Most of the people in the room did not speak English. I mean, so. And, I really honestly didn't feel I was getting through, because I'm talking about monetization and commercial assets, and they're tennis players, But there was a guy sitting there named Alan Ryu, who at the time was the director of the BNP Paribas Masters, which is the indoor tournament that's played at Bercy, but is owned by the French Tennis Federation, who of course is Roland Garros. But the indoor tournament that they did in the fall was struggling, really. It wasn't doing very well. It was a late season tournament. A lot of the big names would not show up because the way the point system worked at the time at the ATP, they didn't really have an incentive to show up. If Rafa and Roger had already gotten to a certain number of points, they didn't need to play in the tournament, so they skipped it. And so they were only selling 55,000 tickets over the 8 days, and they needed to be at around 100 or more. And there was some kind of implied threat that the ATP would actually downgrade the tournament, because at the time it was a Masters event, which is one of the top 9 tournaments in the world outside of the majors. So Alan went back to Paris and told somebody else about my presentation, and the somebody else turned out to be a guy named Frédéric Languepe, who today is the president of FC of Bordeaux. But so Frédéric, first of all, he spoke really good English. Frédéric was a gymnast for the French national team in the Seoul Olympics. So he's a world-class athlete. So what you get with that, of course, is a type A personality, right? You know, so he and I kind of hit it off. So he called me after I had this presentation. He wasn't at the first presentation, and we ended up meeting, and they ended up hiring me. And I worked with them for 3 years, and they went from 55,000 tickets to 110. They doubled. And I was in an adaptive way convinced them to hire salespeople, basically to go out and sell tickets. And that was something that, like, what are you talking about? We don't hire salespeople in France. Salespeople? What do you mean? Selling tickets, huh? And so I convinced them to change in innumerable ways. Now, we were really lucky with Frédéric. After his career as an athlete, he went to work for Deloitte, so he was a finance guy. He got money. He understood what money was, and he was curious and open-minded. And I tell you, Katie, the struggle, the challenge, I should say, over all these years working in Europe has been, am I talking to people that are open-minded? It's not easy to convince people that there's another way to do things, Now we can, maybe this is a good segue, the pandemic that we're unfortunately experiencing is opening more minds in 2 months than I've been able to open in, 16 years, okay? So it's in many, there's going to be, I know there's going to be a lot of bad outcomes, but there are going to be good outcomes as well. And there's many, many opportunities that are going to emerge. But anyway, Frédéric really took to me, and I had an ongoing relationship with the French Tennis Federation in all kinds of different ways. At one point, they hired me, and we took a look at some alternative, some new, to build a new tennis facility at Roland Garros. The project that we put on the table did not happen, but we got involved in that. And then I used that as a springboard to get into other tennis. And so I did that. Tennis, I think, could be bigger. And tennis, to me, is the numbers that tennis does outside of the majors, okay? The majors do great, but outside of the majors are disappointing to me. I think, and this is not personal, but, a lot of the tournament directors are sort of ex-player type of people, that kind of grew up in the game, and they're not really business. And, but there's great potential. There still is, I think, in tennis. It's a sport where you get so close to the athletes, right? And the athletes are all amazing, and they're good looking people, right? So, I mean, right, men and women, they're good looking, and they're, you're close. It's a cool sport. I think so much more could be done. But anyway, the bottom line is I did work in tennis for a few years. I had a good time. I was in England. I was in Nottingham. I worked with Nottingham, believe it or not.
That's very close to where I grew up.
Okay. So because I knew when I went to Nottingham that had something to do with Robin Hood, right? Something like that.
Yeah, Robin Hood, Maid Marian. All of that, Robin Hood, Men in Tights.
Yeah. So that's what I
Sherwood
do.
Forest.
But I did a lot of things. I was involved at one time in trying to develop a massive multi-use sports and entertainment complex in Moscow. We were actually hired by Mikhail Prokhorov, who at the time was the owner of CSK Moscow. So I knew them through basketball. But they hired G2 Strategic, and then I brought in a team around me of architects and other people, and we went pretty far down the road. I probably shouldn't tell the story publicly about why it dropped, so I'll have to do that with you offline sometime. But Prokhorov turned out to be the owner of the Brooklyn Nets. So he's now very well known because he was the first Russian to ever buy an NBA team. Now he has since sold just recently to Jerry Tsai. But it was an amazing experience, just unbelievable. So I've been to Moscow a lot. I have a lot of friends in Russia. I like going to Moscow, actually. It's, you know, it's like the first time I was there, it's like, whoa. But I've been to Moscow, I've been to Dubai. You know, what this has done as far as sort of culturally, and to be able to travel and meet other people and see other cultures, it's awesome. And then at one point, I got a deal with, everybody wants to be in football because all the money's in football, right? And, you know, I didn't know how to get into football. I didn't know anybody in football in Europe. I didn't know who to call, or I didn't really have a network in that world. But so I learned that the French Ligue 1 had was going to put an RFP out to hire a consultant to help them figure out the fan experience, how to improve the fan experience, okay? And I knew that the people who were going to, first of all, in France, you can't do anything if you don't have a French partner. So you period. Yeah. So, and then I knew that outside of France, all the big names were going to propose. McKinsey, Deloitte, and architects like Populous. And I'm thinking, I can't compete with these big companies, you know. But I found a French partner who was really good called Kenio, and they had been involved in a lot of events, including the tour and other things around France. And so they agreed to partner with me, and we said, let's go for it. So what I did is, there was the first round, we had to submit a written bid presentation response to the RFP. And then we were hoping to get shortlisted. The shortlisted companies, I think they shortlisted 3 or 4 or something, and they just, you know, big interview, walk into the room, 20 people around the room. And I thought, how do I differentiate? And so what I did is, bottom line is, I went in and I said, look, the fan experience is really important, but the problem you have is you don't have any fans. So why are we talking about the fan experience when you have a shortfall of fans? You have big problems with occupancy. Your season ticket numbers are like 25% of capacity, whereas in Spain, it's like 80%. I mean, yes, we need to address the fan experience because that's really retention. But what we also need to do is talk about how we're going to get new people. How are we going to create new demand? And like it turns out, all European clubs, they make an assumption that there's plenty of natural demand, that people love football so much that if you just put tickets on sale, but the truth is tickets do not sell themselves. I mean, a certain number of tickets sell themselves, but not enough. And so I went in and made the argument that you have to expand the scope of this mission. You can't only talk about making the experience better. You have to talk about driving demand, and especially in football. How are we going to capture the attention and the imagination of Gen Z coming up and kind of the younger side of millennials? Because you're aging, your audience is aging. This idea that, you know, tickets stay in the family forever is a double-edged sword. I mean, forever is a long time, and all of a sudden the father's my age or 70 or something, and, you know, they don't want to go as much. And then as I started really looking into it, I'm seeing, well, the pricing, the pricing of a season ticket is so cheap. I mean, because they discount it so much. And so it's just really inexpensive in most of the continental European countries. I'm not talking about the UK particularly, but the price of the season ticket is very inexpensive. A lot of that is because of politics. Like if you're the president of Barcelona, you're not going to raise your prices and make your members unhappy with you since they get to elect you. I get that. I mean, that's reality. And then there's economic issues. There's, the capacity to pay is different in New York City than it is in a lot of other markets. So, but because the season ticket is relatively inexpensive, I started realizing there's a big occupancy problem. So Barcelona says, well, we sell 97,000 tickets and we have 80,000 season tickets, from our members. But then you go to the game and there's only 50,000 people and there's 30,000 empty seats. You go, what's the deal? Well, what the deal is they only go to the games that matter. And, so whether the importance of the game and the notoriety of the opponent really are big factors, because staying home and just leaving your tickets in your drawer, no big deal. You're not losing much financially. So I came in and started talking about resale and the need to be able to transfer and going digital and going paperless and, data. And of course you got GDPR in Europe, which makes things more complicated than the States because people have to opt in instead of opting out. And it's, there's a lot of issues, but anyway, this has been my modus operandi, has been to try to teach both the leagues and the clubs to treat this like a business. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't also treat it like football, and all the heritage aspects are important. But there's been a lot of irresponsibility when it comes to business, right? I mean, when you read right now in this pandemic that Barcelona is having cash flow issues, this is a team that does like $1 billion in revenue, and they've got cash flow issues. That's a little hard to understand. But when you're paying out, the money that's being paid, the numbers that's being paid, not only for payroll, but transfer fees and all this, and I know so many teams, the way they balance the budget at the end of the year, they lose 5 or 6 million and then they sell off players. And, I just don't know that that's really I don't really like that model. I mean, as you can see, I'm a Boston Red Sox fan.
Yep.
The things I used to love about Boston, and I still love, I hope in the future, is that these young players would come up in their minor league system and work their way up to the major league club. And so they, it's like family. And so, that's a cool thing. And that's what the academy system should do. You should take a kid who had promise when they were 14 years old, and all of a sudden they're 21 years old and they're on the big club. And to me, that's a great story. What I don't like in Europe, that is, as soon as they're good, the team has to sell them. And who do they sell them to? You guys. They sell them to you guys because you have all the money. And
Did have all the money. Not sure it's quite the case anymore.
The system is complicated. I understand it. And I don't pretend to think that you can just come in and just change the system. It's not going to happen like that. But I do think there are several things that are changing, evolving. I'm very impressed with, and anyway, as you know, I got the French as a client. Then I had a consortium of clubs in France. And then LaLiga became a client. That's the Spanish league, which is a really big deal. And, they're evolving. I mean, but they're growing. President Tebas is a very impressive guy. He's a big voice, right? But I think in a good way, he's pushing change. Not easy to get the teams. You're talking about 42 clubs at both levels, and to get the teams to get their mentality to realize that this is more than football is challenging. But so that's why I think they hired me. That, because I run around, I spend time at the league and with league people, and I do workshops and all kinds of things. But the thing that is probably most valuable is that when I go to Spain, we go out and meet. I have a colleague in Spain who helps me in Spain, and we go out and meet with the clubs in their markets at their stadiums. We have right now 9 different clubs that we call demonstration clubs. And that's really great because now I'm in their environment. One of the things I guess I'm kind of well known for there is I'll walk into the lobby the first time, in the office. And what do you think is the first thing that you see? Trophies.
Yeah.
Trophies. Hundreds of trophies. Trophies that go back to 1917, the 1800s. Trophies. The walls are lined with trophies because this is what drives everything. Trophies. I want more trophies. So maybe we need to invent a new competition so I can have another trophy. So this is why you have mid-season derbies, all this stuff. In the NBA, we got one trophy. In Europe, you got all kinds of trophies. Anyway, I try to say, so the problem with trophies, I love trophies like everybody else, but the problem with trophies is every time you walk in, every time an employee walks through the front door and walks back to their office, it evokes the past. And I want to evoke the future. And I suppose if I've been effective with some clubs, not all, that's the thing. It's to try to get them to understand that if we want the sport to thrive and be as relevant in the future as it has been in the past, we have to change with the times. And we have to understand that the expectations of the next generation and the generation that will follow, even Gen Z, is completely different than their fathers. And we have to understand that having a sport where only 20% of the people sitting in the stands are female that's not a good thing. I've been very impressed with the English Premier League and the strides that they've made from the historical past to where things are going. I think that's been stimulated by fresh ownership. I know sometimes it's controversial. I know that people are upset that prices have gotten so much higher, and but there's just we have to be economically viable if football is going to stay viable. Things change. And people's sensitivities change. And when you're in your mother's womb and you're not born, to love football. Just because it's in the family doesn't mean that, it's in the DNA. And so, in getting people to understand that and adapt, I would say it's happening in the last 2 years more than it ever has. I'm not negative. I'm optimistic. We're getting all kinds of things change, but change is challenging, right? So I guess I would, if I had to say what my title is today, it's change agent.
Yeah, I think that's quite a nice segue then into the final question I was going to ask you. Obviously, pandemic allowing, you're going to be one of our keynote speakers at the ALSD International event coming to Liverpool Football Club's iconic Anfield Stadium this October. And you're also going to be moderating 2 panel sessions, one with EuroLeague Basketball, and we've already got a couple of clubs. I think it's Robin Gollbach from FC Bayern Munich, and then I'm never going to pronounce her name correctly, so you might just help me out. Una.
Try.
Yeah, I don't even think I can pronounce the club name either. Look on the website. And then obviously we've got, then there's from athletic club as well, we've got Borja, Gonzalez, Bilbao.
Right.
So, so what are you hoping to cover in those 2 sessions? And obviously, what are you advising the clubs at the moment? Obviously, I'm taking it your advice is not, sort of sit on your hands and do nothing during the pandemic. Very much the opposite. Be proactive as opposed to reactive.
Well, you probably don't want another 1-hour answer, do you? So I'll try to give you the condensed version. What I would have talked about originally when you first contacted me and what I think we should be talking about now are different. And, the one thing we know, the one certainty there is right now is uncertainty. That's a certainty. A lot of clubs, a lot of leagues are planning for assumed scenarios. And I think it's good that they're planning for assumed scenarios, but we all know that the assumptions are going to turn out to be wrong. That's for sure. So I'm trying to coach our clubs, the clubs that we work with, to stay nimble, to stay flexible, to over-communicate. Some clubs haven't communicated anything, 0. They haven't even talked to their fans. They're frozen. They're paralyzed. Because they can't deal with uncertainty. So they feel like if they don't know what the schedule is, if they don't know when we're going to play games, if they don't know things, they just do nothing. That's the reality. Not with some clubs. There's other clubs that understand, no, it's the opposite. You need to tell people, even if you have nothing to tell them. You need to tell them, I have nothing to tell you, but I'm working on it. Right? We're talking about, how do we compensate fans for games they're not going to get? Because a lot of clubs are very worried about cash flow as well, understandably. But at the same time, it's not their money. So I said, well, somebody buys a season ticket and they pay you up front for the season ticket, and then you go use their money and spend their money. I mean, what do you think? They're a bank? They're not a bank. Your fans aren't a bank. They're your customers. So, I've had clubs tell me they're not going to refund. It's like, you're not going to refund? Do you understand the damage? And a lot of, then they'll say, well, but nobody's called to complain. Nobody's called. I said, look, this is all, fluid. So they haven't called yet. Now we see that, a week ago, somebody filed a class action lawsuit in the United States against Major League Baseball, Ticketmaster, and StubHub. Understandably so. I can tell you, I spent $1,000 buying 3 tickets to 2 games, Boston at Seattle. Those games were supposed to be played 2 or 3 weeks ago. And at some point, I want my money back. I live in Portland. I had hotels booked. This is an annual trip we do as a family. At some point, I want my money back. And if they tell me I can't have my money back as a customer, I'm going to be really, really upset. That's not right. Put aside the legalities. It's just not right. And that is going to affect my perception of baseball, But there are many things that can be offered as an option to customers in lieu of a refund. So what I'm stressing is we give people options, choice. We empower our customers. They make the decision. We give them a menu to choose from. The menu could include donating your tickets, buying them, and then having them donated as a way to say thank you to the people that are putting themselves on the line every day. It could be that in lieu of a refund, please take my money and donate it in a similar way. Instead of the physical ticket, donate it just in cash. It could be various forms of credits and vouchers. It could be, and what I like from a pure business point of view, is is adding value. Most clubs have excess capacity, and I'm trying to teach them, look, an empty seat is currency. It's just currency. So if somebody has a category 3 seat and you give them the option of saying, listen, I'll upgrade you for the same money, that's different than a discount. It doesn't cost you anything to do it, but they're getting a positive benefit. Not saying everybody wants that, but some people might want that. So the key is choice, and I think I'm getting through to people on this. But, you know, in some cases, some teams have kind of jumped the gun. Some teams haven't done anything. So there's a whole range of things. So what we're doing, both EuroLeague and LaLiga, I'm very busy on this and very involved. We are developing guidelines. We can't obligate, we're not going to, I don't think the leagues are going to force clubs to do things. I think they're going to offer advice. And the guidelines are going to deal with kind of the here and now. Messaging, communications, the compensation issue, other things. And then the guidelines are going to deal with, okay, what are we going to do when we start playing games but no people are in the stands? Then we're going to address what are we going to do when we are playing games and there's only some people in the stands? And then what do we do when it's time to open the doors and welcome everybody back? Because the two things are going to have to be addressed. If the WHO and all the governments say we're open tomorrow, is anybody going to go? I mean, fear and money. Fear and money are a huge challenge. What are you doing to address these challenges as a club? There's literally hundreds of ways to address fear and money, but it's going to require planning. It's going to require investment. It's going to require a reallocation of resources, moving resources away. It's going to require a level of cooperation between the club and whoever the entity is that operates the venue, which often is not the club. Sometimes it is, probably more in England, but you know, that is really critical. The level of sanitation that's going to be necessary is, you know, we have to, the perception, because you probably saw the first polling I saw on this came out of Seton Hall University, and 71%, I think, I might be off, but I think it was 71% of Americans, and this is a US poll, said, no, we're not going into a stadium. No way, until there's a vaccine. Well, when's the vaccines? I mean, that's a year, right? Or some people say 2 years. So we cannot afford, if that polling data holds when reality sets in, whoa, that's just a really big problem. I mean, there's some clubs, especially frankly in European football and basketball, they can't survive that. So we're talking in some cases about survival, in my opinion. And then we're talking about brand and other things too. How you manage this, how transparent are you being, and how you communicate is just critically important. I was on the phone yesterday with Bordeaux, and Bordeaux did focus groups. They did a bunch of focus groups virtually, very smart. So in developing their policies on how they're going to manage it, they listened and empowered their customers. So all they're doing is responding to what their customers told them instead of trying to impose on the customers. It's, hey, you tell us what we should be doing here, and then we'll follow your lead. Much better way of doing it. So, you know, something like that, Katie. But you know what? I don't know what the deal is going to be in October, so I'm going to probably be working on this like the day before in this case.
Well, as we were saying behind the scenes, it was, you know, obviously you'll either be physically with us in Liverpool or possibly virtually or remotely with us in Liverpool, which, you know, it is going to be the new normal for so many of us. You know, everything that has been our normal up until now is no longer. And, you know, that $1 million question, you know, will fans return to the stadiums pre-vaccine. We know they will post-vaccine. But yeah, there's challenging times ahead. But like you said, sitting on your hands and doing nothing is definitely not the answer.
No way. And by the way, I don't think we know what they're going to even do post-vaccine.
Yeah.
I mean, we are, particularly people who are older. But you see, I look at this, and this is no offense against people my age, okay, since I'm, but this is an opportunity to refresh the fan base. Refreshing the fan base, you want to have a certain amount of churn in your fan base, always, even in normal times, right? You cannot just rely on the same people. That's called going back to the same well over and over again. Eventually, the well runs dry. You have to bring in new people, and you have to excite people. And, Gen Z want to come to socialize. They want to come to gather. They want to come to hang out. They want to, everybody, the buzzword of the day is experience. Everybody experience, right? Okay, but it's a good word. I mean, it's an accurate word. We need to give people an experience. And for people who think that the game itself is enough, even when the food is terrible, even when there's no ice, even when it's a big hassle getting in the stadium, and now it's going to be more of a hassle for sure going forward. We're going to have new procedures to get people in and out. If it's a hassle going to the dirty bathroom, if the people working there are not pleasant, then that's not an experience that people want to partake in. And we live in a global society now, so people know what is the difference between a really great experience and a not so great experience and a poor experience. So I think this is essential. And, football's got to advance. Now, of course, the UK is leading the way. Germany's doing some really great things. Spain's doing some really great things in certain markets. Italy, in certain markets, Juventus, obviously, but it does tend to be the bigger clubs that have resources. So how we're going to get that to trickle down and to make this efficient for clubs that don't have as much resource is interesting and challenging. But I think even for the small, one of my favorite clubs is, I think you already know, to work with is Mallorca. And Mallorca is a very small club, right? And what they've done there to me, is brilliant. One of my other new favorite clubs is, I always pronounce it badly, is called Valladolid, which is a suburb of Madrid. And these guys are doing a great job. They're really great. They're really forward thinking on top of it. They're in a small market, kind of in the shadows of Madrid, with big clubs in Madrid, and yet they're creating and always working on the fan experience and making it better. And that's what we need. It's not, the fix isn't always about money. It doesn't mean you have to build a fancy club to create a great VIP experience. It's not always about the food, because the truth is the food can't be as good in a stadium environment as it is in a great restaurant. You can't duplicate it. So why even try? Have you ever been to the Madrid Masters tennis tournament?
No, I haven't.
Best hospitality I've ever experienced in my life. The pre-match experience is unbelievable. So I haven't been there for 12 years, but my memory is still with me. The culinary experience was amazing. There were fashion shows. There were former tennis players everywhere. There was kind of a social, it was just the architecturally, the design aspects of it, the music aspects of it, just how they integrated tennis with culture and made it a very cultural experience, which frankly for me made the tennis part of the experience better. There's lots of ways to deal with this.
Well, I should look forward to enjoying a fantastic experience, hopefully with you physically in Liverpool. If not, we'll have a remote beer. But thanks so much for your time, Marshall, and I'll make sure I'll put all your contact details on the end of the interview so people can get in contact with you and G2 Strategic for more information.